Hi. As Nikki said, my name's Bevan Clark. I am the co-founder of RetailMeNot, Transmap, and Cushy CMS. And I'm also on the founding team of Lifx. I'm an investor in Pin Payments, CoinJar, VistaPoint Advisors, which is a boutique investment bank in the US, Rome to Rio, and AngelCube, which is Melbourne's first startup incubator, and a whole bunch more as well. I'm going to start off with talking a little bit about RetailMeNot and the early days. So RetailMeNot is the world's largest repository of coupon codes for discounts to be used when shopping at online stores. There's over 50,000 stores represented on the site, and over 500,000 coupons have been contributed by the community to the site. The business model behind it is that retailers pay commissions for purchases that are made by users. So, for example, you can visit the site and find a 5% off coupon at Gap, and then you would go through to Gap, make your purchase, you would save 5%, and RetailMeNot gets a small commission. The original idea was conceived in October 2006. My business partner, Guy King, actually was searching for a coupon online. I suspect it was for web hosting or something similar. And he saw that most of the coupon sites out there were pretty spammy and had a very narrow selection, poor user interfaces, etc. So he modified some code that he had built previously for another site called BugMeNot, and launched as RetailMeNot. And as you can see, the sites shared a fair amount of similarities. And he did that over a weekend. He launched it on the Monday and told me about it. And I said, I suspect that there could be some money in that. We went into business shortly after. And the other key takeaway from this is probably that that's where the RetailMeNot name comes from. You'd have to have a pretty good reason to call a startup RetailMeNot, I suspect. So the first week was very interesting. Not sure if I'm having technical difficulties here. Oh, there it is. So the first week, we had almost 2,000 digs, and I suspect there's a few people that don't know what dig is anymore. But dig was basically what Reddit is today, and so to be on the homepage of dig could drive a fair amount of traffic. And I think we got about 20 or 30,000 visits just from that. However, the biggest catalyst came entirely out of left field. We just got a mention on a show that was syndicated to 500 radio stations throughout the US. It was called the Kim Commando Show. Her audience was very well aligned with our own. It was middle-aged women who like to shop. And I think that drove about 50,000 or 100,000 visits in the first week. So it took quite a few months from there before we actually realized any revenue from the site, though. There was a lot of complications, being based in Australia, etc., and trying to understand the affiliate model. We actually didn't know anything about it at the time. We just had a hunch that this would work. So the first affiliate we joined up with was Amazon. And our first revenue came in the form of a gift certificate from Amazon for $1,248. We were pretty excited about this. We thought, this is fantastic. This is it. We're on our way. We were still working jobs at the time at realestate.com.au. I was a project manager, and Guy was a designer. And so we thought, this is fantastic. And then we realized, of course, that you can't actually, at that time, you couldn't actually buy anything from Australia on Amazon. So the next obvious choice was to sell it on eBay. So we sold the gift certificate on eBay for $1,140 US, which once again we thought this was fantastic. But then we were the victims of a scam. So our very first payment for RetailMeNot was lost in the ether somewhere. So we were quite disappointed by this, and it actually took us another couple of months before we actually got our first payment after that. And yeah, $29,900 and something was our first commission payment. You can see it was actually sent to my home address. We still didn't have a business at that point. Yeah, that was the day that I walked into realestate.com.au and submitted my resignation. So this was our first office. It was more like a small Art Deco apartment in the middle of in Melbourne CBD. Our first employee there. And you know, the most important purchase or gift actually from one of our employees was the beer fridge, and I was pretty excited about that. No air conditioning, no heating. It was terrible. So the next year we moved into a new office. Air conditioning, heating, the works. But then soon after that, a couple of years later, this is what it looked like. So this is the current RetailMeNot headquarters in Austin, Texas. They're still using the RetailMeNot logo that we designed a few years ago. And the company that actually owns the majority of the company now, it's public, and it actually has changed its name to RetailMeNot as well. This is what the first couple of years of growth looked like. So you can see there was quite a few spikes during the Christmas period. There's a few troughs there as well, and I'll talk about them in just a minute. But the last month that we fully owned it, we had over 20 million visits, and that year our revenue was somewhere 20 to 25 million US dollars. We had 5 people working on it. This is when we really knew that we'd made it.
Jeopardy!
RetailMeNot.com helps you save money with these, which once had to be clipped from the newspaper. Gary.
What are coupons?
Right.
We had a large PR team that we outsourced working in the Valley. They had nothing to do with that. One of our customers, just sent it through. And yeah, that was pretty amazing. And it wasn't until that point that we realized that we were actually having a significant impact. You know, over 10% of everybody in the US had used the website that year. So in 2010, at the end of 2009, we came to the conclusion that for us to really push the site where it needed to go, or where it could go, we had to either move to the US or sell the majority of the company. So we received our first offer. It was just a total coincidence. There happened to be somebody from a well-known VC fund in the US that was coming over to Australia to visit. They asked us out for a beer. We of course said yes, and we'd spoken to a whole bunch of VCs before this, but we'd never really entertained the idea of selling or taking investment. And yeah, it was the next morning he walked into our office with a substantial term sheet that was much bigger than what we had expected to get. So in January, we engaged an investment banker. In March, we sent out confidential information memorandums. By June, July, we had term sheets. We got about 10 term sheets, I think. We went through due diligence process with 3 different parties. And November, we cashed out the majority of the company. So we're still shareholders now. The company that bought us was called Whale Shark Media. They're a roll-up that was of various coupon sites that were venture funded. A few years later, they changed their name to RetailMeNot, as I mentioned before. 2013, they were responsible for $3.4 billion in sales, over 600 million visits to all their sites, and now over 400 employees. And the current market value, I think, is about $1.4 billion. So yeah, it was definitely an exciting ride to get to that point. So in my opinion, this is what we did right. We, crazily enough, naivety was probably the first attribute that we had. So we had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. We had no idea that parts of our model would be quite frustrating to our competitors. We accepted coupon codes from every single merchant under the sun, and we took any coupons that were available to us, and we used them up on the site. We just had a laser focus on building the best user experience. The amount of money that we were making never came into any of our decision making. And a prime example of that is that Victoria's Secret was one of the main merchants on the site, was one of the most popular. And we didn't have a commission relationship with them at all. And the reason why that was important was because due to the network effects of the site, that people would come along to the site and find a coupon they were looking for. So for example, we got a lot of traffic for the Victoria's Secret coupons. And so then the more people that visited the site, the more people contributed to the site, which meant the more merchants that we had, which obviously then meant that we would appear more regularly in Google and we'd get more traffic. We also had a really data-driven approach. So we A/B tested every facet of the site to the nth degree, just to make sure that we were showing the top coupons right at the top. We engaged mathematicians, etc., just to help us get those algorithms right. There was a fair few things that we screwed up as well. Like I said, we only had 5 people working on the site. Relationship building with over 6,000 merchants, I think we had relationships with. That was basically my role, and that was pretty challenging. And what it meant is that while we would still get increased commissions just because the amount of traffic that we were passing through to the merchants, they would, as we sent through 10,000 visitors, they would put us on 2% commission, 20,000 was 4% commission, and 50,000 was 8% commission. What we didn't realize that if we actually, and it wasn't until much later that we realized that if we actually had face-to-faces with all those merchants, that level of trust would then be there, and they could boost our commissions up to 10 or 12%. So we left a fair bit of money on the table doing that, but it's hard to know whether that's actually something we screwed up. And I feel this about all of them, actually. Like, it's hard to know whether it was a strength or it was something that we messed up, because it just meant that we could just go our own way. We could focus on the users and not care too much about merchants. We had problems seeing, having a clear vision where the site was going to go. If you'd asked me even a year in, when we were making a few $1 million a year, I think that there's no way that I would have been able to tell you that it would have been a $1 billion company one day. And we had some technical risk management issues as well. So we had a very small development team, a very small engineering team. And that meant that we didn't have very good quality assurance processes in place, which meant that occasionally we screwed things up. And one of the prime examples of that is that we used to have automated tools that would stop people from scraping our site and stealing our content. And once we actually blocked the Google bot, and that had quite catastrophic implications, obviously. So we, within 24 hours, we knew what we'd done wrong, but we were entirely delisted from Google, and that's where all our traffic came from. So we suffered for a good 3 or 4 weeks after that. Another thing that we did was a little bit more technical. We accidentally put a line of code in every single page. The engineers out there will know it much better than me, but I think it's to do with canonical relationships. So what it meant was that Google interpreted every single one of our pages as being exactly the same as the home page. And so 99% of our content was delisted that time as well. So it happened twice, and that's some of the troughs that you can see on there. But yeah, we got through it. We persevered. A lot of people have asked me in the past what the key metrics were that we took most notice of. And they often think there's something like revenue per coupon, revenue per visitor, monthly visitors, etc. And we took a lot of notice of those things But the bottom line is that what drove all of those metrics was just contributions to the site. So the things that we cared the most about was the number of coupons that were submitted, the number of comments that were made. So the number of coupons that submitted was important because that meant that we had more merchants on the site. And then number of comments made was important because it went to the quality of the content on our pages, and the votes was vital as well. So we asked people to vote on whether a coupon worked well for them, etc. And that meant that we could drive and ensure that the best coupons were right at the top. So just to touch on what I'm doing now, I'm a pretty active investor, and I work with a whole bunch of startups, mostly in Melbourne. But I'm looking for things that really excite me, and generally they're startups that have a global impact. They can be life-changing, and they often have some traction as well. And so Lifx is a really good example of this. They proved they had traction by selling $1.3 million worth of light bulbs in 6 days on Kickstarter. And obviously, there's a global market for that as well. So thank you very much for listening to me.
All right, I think we're going to go to the lounge room for the Q&A.
Sure.
As I said, so make sure you ask your questions on Slido, so sli.do/thesunrise. Once you ask that, I'll begin asking the questions from that, but the only way to ask questions for you guys is to go to Slido/thesunrise. I thought the first question I wanted to ask you, one of the most fascinating things to me is that you had a company of 5 employees with tens of millions of customers visiting your site each month, and sort of how you thought about hiring both in the beginning and the kind of highs and lows of success and failures of hiring people and what worked, but then also as the company obviously grew at this very, very high growth rate, why not hire more?
Yeah, I think the obvious answer to how did we think about hiring was that we just didn't. We were so busy fighting fires all the time that we didn't do that amount of forward planning. And obviously knowing what I know now, I think that we could have made a significant difference by hiring more people. But part of the reality was as well is that I'd spent a couple of years feeling like I was banging my head against a brick wall at realestate.com.au, and I believe it's totally different now. I should add. And I really just didn't want to work for a company that was sales driven. I really wanted to work for an engineering focused company. And when I say that we had 5 employees, that was 5 employees working directly on RetailMeNot. We also had a larger staff working on a couple of the other startups like Cushy CMS and Transmap and The Wall and some others that we launched that didn't work out. So yeah, we did have more a few more employees than that. And so obviously, generally speaking, with the hiring, it was really just people that we'd worked with before and people who had worked with people that we'd worked with. So it was all on recommendations. But it's very important to ensure that you keep the culture right and that you hire the right people, because one engineer, one fantastic engineer is worth 5 average.
Talk about the moment you mentioned at the end of 2009 that you felt like you had to move to the US, or you had to take on capital, or was this time? Sort of go deeper into the thought process behind it, and then even if you kind of revise history or look back, how much of what you felt was true and not true, do you think?
I think we very much made the right decision for the time. We both had young families. We were getting to the point that we were sleeping with our mobile phones, and it was becoming a bit too much to run the business that way. But yet we still didn't want to work for a business or in a business that had hundreds of employees. So we certainly made the right decision at the time. Yeah, if I had my time again with all the circumstances exactly the same, I'd make the same decisions.
Talk about this, sort of terrifying existence of, one traffic source, Google, sending you so many people, and so many very qualified people, people who are in this very buy mode of wanting to transact. You mentioned some of the kind of dark, self-inflicted moments of losing substantial parts of your site from the Google index. How did you even just emotionally navigate this roller coaster of this huge kind of source of awesome traffic that could disappear?
Very badly. Lots of beer. I continued to have this faith as well in Google as a traffic source. In that, you know, their objectives, it seemed to me, were very aligned to us. So it always scared everybody from the outside looking in that we relied so much on it. But the reality is that their objective is to have the best, you know, to find the best content, and we just fought to have the best content. And that was the entirety of our you know, of our focus.
I'm going to go to the audience Q&A, so if we could get the questions on the front screens. Talk about the beginning, you know, this as almost a content network. So obviously the contributions, the contributions of users to the site. You were in the beginning making the contributions yourselves. Did you hire people to seed that? And what were sort of some, you know, chicken and egg tactics that you might have used in the beginning?
Yeah, I won't deny that probably the first couple of 100 coupons on the site were contributed by us, but very quickly after that, it had its own legs, and it would, and then it really just came down to just minimizing the barriers to people contributing. And so we did some crazy things, particularly at the time, where, for example, we never asked anybody to log in to contribute to the site. And so we preferred to moderate based on user feedback as opposed to knowing who our contributors were at the start. And so I think that's still something that was hugely beneficial and made a big difference, and something that even the people that have come along after us and exactly copied our model, they still haven't taken that facet of it.
Cool. The first question comes from Yosef. Does being in Australia hurt or help you?
I think it's a mixed bag. It definitely has both sides. I'd say that in the early stages, it certainly helped us, and that comes down to the naivety that I was talking about. Like, it basically shielded us from any external influences. And I think that it's probably significantly easier now to start up in Australia as well. There was, as far as I was aware anyway, there was no real community, and you know, to see a crowd like this now is just amazing. So there was really nobody for us to turn to and ask questions and you know, and try to understand what direction we should be taking the business. For a later stage, I think there's definitely some benefits to moving to the US. But any Australian, I believe, should probably start up here and spend the first couple of years here.
Talked about how you found the right people at the beginning. Question from Mick Glebinskis is, how did you find your first customer? So that first Amazon check, who bought what for Amazon to give you some money, if you remember?
No, I don't remember exactly what it was. Yeah, I mean, I think that it really just came down to us saying, okay, what are the most popular stores on the site, and do they have some sort of way that we can earn revenue that is very low touch? And so obviously we could just join up to Amazon online. And then after that, to get the other 6,000 customers on board, we really just proved our model. We proved that we could send really valuable traffic to merchants. And then we actually ended up building, because we were such a small team, we ended up building a lot of tools that enabled us to actually join affiliate programs, etc., automatically. So the beauty of that was that somebody would come and contribute a coupon to a website that we'd never even heard of, and then in the background we would automatically go and sign up to that affiliate program and start earning revenue from it.
You talked about Google search. Talk about other growth channels and things that you tried in terms of user acquisition that worked and didn't work beyond Google search?
Yeah, we tried a bunch of other things. We spent, at one point, I think we were spending about $20,000 a day on SEM. We could never actually get it to return a positive ROI. And to this day, I still don't know why that is. It seemed to me that it was obvious that we were earning good revenue from visitors to the site. We had the best content, we had the best pages. Surely we should be able to just arbitrage there somehow and spend 10 cents to get a visitor and make 11 cents off that. If we'd been able to find that magic, then we would have doubled down on it, but we never did. The other huge thing that contributed to the success of the site was hiring a PR team. So we had a lot of inbound PR inquiries, and obviously handling that from Australia for a US audience is very challenging. So we had a PR team that would look after that, based in San Francisco. And they did a great job of fielding those queries and getting us extra press as well. But the bottom line is that you still have to have a product and a story to tell. Otherwise, there's nothing for them to do.
In the beginning, did you do any market sizing? And did any kind of that planning come into it? You mentioned the naivety as a plus in just doing it, but along the way, sort of, did you?
No.
I think that's a key lesson. What are the books that have influenced you the most?
Yeah, I didn't do a lot of reading in that time. We were just far too busy. But I have recently I've read The Hard Thing About Hard Things, which I think is just a book that just everybody should read.
Question about the PR provider. How did you choose them, and how did you know they were doing a good job?
I'm trying to remember. I think that it was actually we fished out an old Paul Graham essay, and he spoke about this PR provider in an essay. It was a couple of years old even at that time, and we just reached out to them at that point. So we figured if they'd done right by him, then they'd probably work out for us as well.
Talk about what made you take the first step, or what made Guy take the first step, and maybe even rewinding before RetailMeNot to BugMeNot, or whatever the first startup thing was.
I think the important thing in there is probably that it was the first step for both of us, it was the first step of many first steps. So both of us had worked on a dozen different things prior to then that had all never gained any significant traction. Guy had obviously had some success with BugMeNot. And I think that it's really, at that stage, it was just coming down to, what can we do that's very low risk, and just give it a shot. And that's what I'd encourage anybody to do, is just give it a shot.
Maybe we've already covered this, but the competitive landscape in 2006, did that sort of impact any of your decisions?
It did, in as much as it gave us something to shoot for. So we saw some of our competitors out there who were generating a lot of traffic and a lot of revenue, and we basically just said that's the one that we want to beat. And I think that about 2 or 3 years in, we started to hit those milestones, and we started to beat those sites. But yeah, there was certainly, we did do after the initial launch, we did do an assessment of the competitive landscape, and it gave us something to shoot for.
Talk about worrying or not worrying about competitors, and what are the positive things you can take out of looking at competitors, and what are the negative things you can take out of it?
I strongly believe that you don't look at competitors. That I think that you have the goal, you have a clear focus, and you just aim directly for that, and you don't look back.
Who are the people that you get advice from, and maybe describe that in a kind of from 2006 to today?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think that obviously people that I've worked with in the past are people that I look to regularly. There's a bunch of people in the Melbourne startup community that are reasonably well known, and I suspect that most people know who they are. That I'll still bounce off quite a bit.
In that first year, how did you decide to pay yourselves what salary, and then when did you pay yourselves a normal salary? When was that moment when you knew this will be something?
Yeah, I mean, I've been unemployed for 8 years now, and haven't drawn a salary whatsoever. So it's really, you know, we made a lot of crazy decisions. We tried very hard to reinvest back into the business, but it came down to that SEM spend, for example, and we did a bunch of other ad campaigns, etc. But we could never get any ROI there.
Maybe the last question is, did having a young family to consider hurt or hinder the growth part of the business and the decisions you made along the way?
Yeah, so in the first year of RetailMeNot, Guy and myself both had our first children. We bought our first houses, and it was our first real business. And I don't advise anybody to do those things at the same time.
Okay, cool. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you to Bevan.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we are pleased to have Collis from Envato.